on this very subject almost over 3 years ago by myself, and where I compared the performance of the United Kingdom with some industry titans, specifically in manufacturing, and at the time it was Rolls-Royce Holdings, comparing it to a titan in Germany, Bosch. And it was found by observing a number of industrial criteria, a number of management consultancy criteria in terms of observing the PwC maturity model, and also looking at a number of academic papers, plus the registration of industrial IoT and artificial intelligence patent. Putting all of these things together, it was concluded that the United Kingdom is lagging behind Germany with respect to observance to Industry 4.0 standards and procedures. And it is my great pleasure now to direct the question: do you perceive the United Kingdom still in need of having to catch up with Germany? And I'd like to pose that to Rosa, please.
Well, it's great to be with you, Joe. Certainly good to join the Birkbeck crew again. And first of all, congratulations to you, because I think that this is a great and an important discussion theme for us. I think all of us can see that the firms that really embrace fourth industrial revolution technologies, whether that's digitalization, AI, robotics, additive manufacturing, you name it, where firms really harness those technologies, they've got real potential to transform their overall performance. And that could come down to things like managing their energy consumption, reducing their waste, connecting better with their suppliers and customers, or of course the thing that a lot of firms focus on much of the time, which is developing the next generation of products that will capture, snare and hold on to future customers. No doubt at all in my mind that as you look around the world, you can certainly see that other nations are moving very, very quickly to seize some of those benefits. And I don't know about you, but it certainly seems to me that I'm being told fairly constantly that, oh, woe is me, the UK is falling behind. That the likes of Singapore, South Korea, or slightly closer to home, the Netherlands or Germany that you used as your exemplar there, are all moving ahead. Is that true? Are we falling behind? Are we the laggards? Well, I think if you look at some of the bald statistics that we've seen recently, they are a mixed bag. If you take a look at the Digital Future Index, which was published by the Digital Catapult last year, and by the way, that index, for those of you who haven't come across it, breaks down the global race for adoption of emerging technologies and innovation, and looks at who's really shaping the world's digital future. It explores where the UK and other countries rank globally in terms of things like AI, virtual and augmented reality, IoT, 5G, blockchain. You know, you get a sense of what it's covering. And what that ranking does is provide insights into the economic health and potential for innovation and growth of different countries. So what's that interesting index actually telling us? Well, here's the thing that actually quite surprised me. If you look at it, it tells you that the UK is first in Europe for the development and uptake of advanced digital technologies. I did pause quite deliberately there, Joe. First in Europe, and actually still not too bad if you look globally. We're third in the world. And that sounds great, doesn't it? You know, heartening stuff. But how does it actually translate on the ground? And I'm a woman who believes in the real world feel of things rather than the bald statistics. Well, certainly, let's start with the statistics. There's some bad news there too. So looked at sector by sector, the distribution of advanced digital technology companies suggests that we are indeed at the risk of falling behind in the fourth industrial revolution technologies. And certainly when I look across the UK manufacturing waterfront, if I'm really honest, and as a Yorkshirewoman I tend to be both honest and really rather blunt, I see a very, very mixed picture. There are certain firms out there that absolutely see that new technologies, particularly digital technologies, can help them to raise their game, whether that's around increasing their productivity or connecting better with their various audiences. So those firms, hurrah, are taking the bull by the horns. But others, frankly, are an awful lot more wary. They're stepping back, they're sitting on their hands, they're not investing. Why is that? Well, in the conversations that I have, I get a very clear message that their reluctance, their hesitation comes down to three things. So the first thing that comes up time and again, and it won't be a surprise to anybody, is cold, hard cash. You know, cash and finance. I've got no doubt at all that particularly at the moment, and perhaps particularly so for smaller businesses, the most significant barrier for moving forwards with harnessing some of these new technologies is cost. I know when I talk to firms, they tell me that at the moment, particularly in the UK, where we've seen spiraling energy costs, they're putting money to one side to pay their energy bills rather than to invest in new digital technologies. And certainly Make UK, the trade association for manufacturers, found that some 41% of the firms that they surveyed were concerned about adopting new technologies purely down to cash flow. And I think that that matters. And about 24% of those, by the way, were also worried about whether they would ever see a real return on their investment. So they remained to be convinced. And by the way, I think there is an issue there as well, Joe, which is that at times there is a bit of a tendency for us to focus on cost rather than value. And I think that that is an appetite issue here within the UK that perhaps we don't share with some of those other countries that are moving ahead. They focus more on the value thing. It's a cultural thing. So first problem, it's all about the money, honey, but it's not the only issue. The second pause for thought that I think manufacturers are facing at the moment is awareness. I doubt that there's a manufacturer in the land that hasn't at some point been exposed to articles, speeches, conversations that tell them all about the wonders of digital technologies. But let's be realistic, there are hundreds, probably thousands of different options out there for them to take. How do they know which is right for them? And how do they understand the roadmap that will lead them from where they are now in terms of their digital business and where they really want to get to? There's an awful lot of firms out there that just can't answer that question. They don't have the skills within their teams that will allow them to boil the issues down and see a way through about what's right for them. And that, of course, touches on my third big cause for hesitation, and that is, of course, skills. You know, even when a business does know what it wants, if it doesn't believe it can find the right people to operate the new technologies, then why should they bother? It's just going to sit there. It's not really going to augment their performance. So money, awareness, skills, three huge blockers to more adoption of new technologies. At least that's what I hear from the businesses that I talk to. But if I may, I'll add one more, and that's time, bandwidth. A message that I get quite often, albeit sometimes between the lines of what businesses are actually saying, is that there's just so much noise in the system, so many areas of uncertainty, that leadership teams don't know quite where they're going to focus first. And that can be a real issue in terms of crowding out the mental space that they need to move digital programs, new technology programs forwards within their businesses. So all big barriers there. That Digital Future Index that I was talking about earlier shows that on average, the UK does fall behind in the average funding per company across a huge range of advanced digital technologies. I think we are something like 11th on the league table of immersive technologies and IoT globally. We may be a top 10 manufacturer, but horror of horrors, we're actually 24th on the list, the world league table when it comes to adopting robotics. And that for me, frankly, is a big problem, because it means that UK competitiveness is at real risk of slipping backwards in some of those key and highly competitive markets. And it could mean that we're much, much slower than we need to be when it comes to addressing some of the big challenges that are out there, whether that's climate change or productivity or whatever. That's going to have impacts, frankly, on every nation in the world and every one of us in this event. And that's why certainly an organization like mine, the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, for those of you who didn't catch it earlier, an organization that is really helping companies to understand what's right for them and what will work for them, and then holding their hands as they go through their own transformation. That's why companies like mine are so important at the moment. And we've got to make sure that businesses can always connect with the friends that can help them take a step forward. And I'll leave it there, Joe.
Thank you very much. Certainly, you've raised a number of points there, which we'll try and cover in a bit more detail. But Tomasz, I'm going to move to you and ask you the same question. What's your perception about the UK? Do you think it's still having to catch up? Seem to have lost him.
Tomasz, you're muted. Your microphone.
We're never allowed an event where at least once somebody isn't told you're on mute. Still on mute. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay, so back to my introduction. As a fan of the UK, someone who lived in the country, and I have actually family in the UK, I try to follow things and observe the fate of British manufacturing with interest. Let me tell you that I spent one recent sabbatical at the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany.
Right.
At the time, I spent a number of months there, and one of the debates, as you know, I don't know how much you know about how Fraunhofer works, but it is a major vehicle through which actually the German government, both the land governments and the federal government, actually actively support German manufacturing.
Yes, absolutely correct. And also with respect to the dissertation, and sorry for jumping in here, they were also supporting Rolls-Royce. So that's why Rolls-Royce were engaging in over 30 Fraunhofer institutes to help them with the research centers.
Well, exactly. So what the Fraunhofer Institute does, as most of you probably know, is they actually share in the R&D costs of industries. And although they are quite critical of some of the bureaucracy of Fraunhofer, nevertheless, I participated at the time with some very fascinating debates, actually comparing Germany and the UK. And the Germans love this sort of debate to show, look at England, it used to be the workshop of the world, and it is falling behind. The share of manufacturing in GDP is alarmingly low. It should be at least about as high as in Japan or Germany. And so our institute is now active in Great Britain, and they're debating, negotiating for Britain to create something of a kind of a clone of a Fraunhofer. I don't know where that is, but from what you say, Joe, it looks like at least they got some British companies involved.
Yeah, but only at the highest echelons of the hierarchy, not at the not in general. Yeah, it's very.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to intervene here, because in fact the catapults were created in 2010, inspired by the Fraunhofer model. So we are already moving down that avenue very, very rapidly. I can say more later.
Okay.
Wonderful. Well, that is interesting. I wanted to say another thing. One of the things that fascinates me, and this is a big question for the UK, if it is going to be a powerhouse in Industry 4.0, for me the question is going to be, is it going to be through FDI? Or is it going to be through, let's say, a more localized effort? Because if you watch the automotive industry, and I discussed that a lot with my students, what I see was almost all the famous British car brands, you know, that we used to love, have actually been taken over by foreign investment. And as you know, there were complaints that Britain could not produce a quality car, yet when the Japanese came with their manufacturing, all of a sudden it turned out that, yeah, it could be done in Britain. So in addition to some of these barriers that Rosa mentioned, there has to be some. I'd love to hear from Rosa why that is the case. Why is it that BMW can produce quality cars in the UK, but somehow Britain failed to come up with, say, a new electric vehicle or something like that? But that's for later debate. So I want to talk briefly, if I may, about artificial intelligence. That's what I was tasked with. So I will share a few observations about this topic, which is occupying so much of our attention. Just to show you the latest cover of the London Economist, you can see that AI is certainly viewed as either coming from the devil or from angels. A very powerful force, and there's a whole lot of attention to this. It's an exploding topic with all kinds of wild claims. Now, one of the things that's being said is that for Britain, the strategy might be to leapfrog into becoming a leader once again through first becoming an AI superpower. And you could make an argument based just on the strength of British science that this might happen. What I'm going to do is actually, I hope to share with you just a couple of numbers and facts about what is the real impact of AI so far. If you like, on industry, just to kind of take a very cool approach. AI, as you know, has been around as an academic discipline for several decades. It then went through, mainly funded by the public sector at that time. One of my friends was an early pioneer of machine learning. And then it went through what is called the AI winter and really exploded only in the recent 21st century with some very, very kind of powerful developments, really very, very recently. I don't know how many of you know that just in 2021, private sector investment in AI research reached $340 billion, while public expenditure on AI research, excluding defense, was only 2.5 billion. So we have this phenomenon where you have the private sector spending 10 times as much on AI as the public sector. And that's a very interesting phenomenon, which some find also to be of some concern. Another statistic, 70% of PhDs in AI today actually want to work for the private sector, up by 21% in 1 year. What does this tell you? It means that it is the private sector, or more specifically, a few selected companies and startups in the private sector that are really driving this show and vigorously competing for dominance. To the point that they have, and to mention some of these companies, obviously it's a battle between Google and Microsoft, and there are some of the very successful startups like Anthropic, Inflections, OpenAI, of course, Adapt AI, etc. There's been a recent article in Science magazine, that Science journal actually, that warns of industry capture of just a few companies dominating this sector, creating huge barriers to entry, and perhaps having too much power as a result. Now, let's see some of the early results of what's going on in terms of real impact, because a lot of it is about potential. You know, we could do this, we could run the whole Internet of Things, we could conquer sustainability based on AI, but the actual, if you look at the bottom line so far, the results are still relatively modest. McKinsey did a survey in which 1/3 of respondents reported cost savings, 63 thanks to AI. 63% survey reported revenue increases due to AI, but these were all well under 10%. Investments in AI have been seeing a steady rise. By 2020, a majority of these survey respondents reported that more than 5% of their digital budgets went to AI. Approximately 25% of respondents reported that at least 5% of earnings before income tax were attributable to artificial intelligence. So what I'm saying is that you can see an early noticeable impact, but it's not yet as revolutionary as some of the visionaries would claim. So what we see then is really a lot of what you could say teething problems at the moment. You have this huge concentration in the private sector and a few companies. You have huge barriers to entry. And then we have the big question is, of course, who's going to monitor, who's going to coordinate, and who's going to supervise AI. And that is still very much an unsettled issue with different approaches. So I think that only after we start resolving this issue, and we have a Chinese approach, as you know, the Chinese are big players in AI. The Chinese have already begun controlling, to some extent, AI, perhaps most aggressively. The EU is debating how to do it, and America hasn't yet decided. So it's very much still an emerging issue, but one with tremendous potential, the way it is going, and one that could have potentially an enormous impact, definitely not just on manufacturing, but on on the whole way the economy operates, including later on in the debate, I can add a few remarks about how it could impact agriculture, but it is already impacting not only research, but for just today, Microsoft announced a $1 billion investment actually in Poland, which is where I'm from, where they're going to build cloud computing capacity for the entire Central European region. So there's going to be tremendous investment by these players. I'm going to stop here and let's continue to discuss. Thank you.
So thank you, Tomasz, for your explanation. I'd like to now extend the question to Jeremy Galpin. Jeremy, who runs a social value consultancy group at Costain. Jeremy, do you think with Industry 4.0, whether the UK is still a laggard or is it catching up?
The quick answer is I still think it's a laggard. So I'm going to share some slides with you as a short video in here as well, just to make some key points, particularly around the infrastructure sector, which is where my area of expertise is. Can you see those slides okay, Joe?
Yes.
So is the UK catching up? So I did a dissertation at Birkbeck. How can digital technology be used to maximise the social value delivered through major infrastructure projects? So if that's of interest, it's working paper 58. Do have a look at it. And the point was made earlier about the value conversation. So I'm going to talk a bit about that and how technology is an important part of the value conversation that Rosa referenced. This is a video from the Transforming Infrastructure Performance group. So I'm going to just play this for you. Hopefully you'll be able to. Joe, let me know if you can hear the sound.
I'm Emma Jane,
Commercial Director for the New Hospitals Programme.
This model visualises the key principles underlying the IPA's Transforming Infrastructure Performance Programme. The first principle is that we have to see the built environment as a system.
Sorry,
Did you have an echo?
yes, we all need to have our microphones mute. Can we all mute our microphones so that we can only hear the audio from the video?
I'm going to stop it there. She began to talk about the role of data and technology and the need to pull those technology and data together at a platform level across the system. And that's kind of where we are in terms of where we need to go. And that's where Industry 4.0 and the wider technology and digital environment can help us make better decisions about our infrastructure assets. So one of the recommendations in my paper is a holistic approach to the implementation of social value. And now it's about value as a whole, not just social value, using a digital framework based around a multi-capitals model for the achievement of policy objectives on major infrastructure projects. and embedding that approach into the whole life cycle of the asset, including planning. And at the time, I referenced the Construction Innovation Hub work around something called the Value Toolkit. And I've been very involved since. In fact, my day job now is primarily delivering this Value Toolkit, and I'm going to explain a bit about that and how that links into the need for technology. I also talked about value at a systems level approach. So to define value, we need to bring all the data together to understand the interactions within the system and across multiple layers. And once we start integrating these systems and layers, there's huge potential for future scenario mapping, and I'm sure that's where AI will play a part in the future. So I recommended that we embed social value data into digital twin development, enabling better decision making on social value across the whole life cycle of infrastructure assets. I would now change that to talk about value as a whole. For those who are not familiar with a digital twin concept, it's basically a digital version of an infrastructure asset. So say it's a motorway, that digital version includes all the traffic flows. And it means in the digital twin version, you can model things like refurbishments or closing a lane or safety measures and see what they do in the digital environment before you actually implement them in the real environment. And it also allows you to see how the asset performs operationally into the future. So the role of technology, Industry 4.0, that's why I say this is very vital to the whole delivery of these assets and seeing them as delivering services to the public and delivering outcomes ultimately. So the Value Toolkit is a policy intervention that was developed together with government and then developed in partnership with over 200 experts from across industry and government. It's now embedded in what's called the Construction Playbook. And very importantly, there's a statement in the Green Book from HM Treasury talking about the role of the Value Toolkit in integrating economic, environmental and social objectives into infrastructure. And ultimately, it's a route to better value. So spend a little bit of time on this one slide, then I've got one more to go. So this visual aid, this value profile as it's called, the ambition is that every infrastructure project in the UK will have one of these value profiles. And what it's about is making decisions at a systems level about what we're trying to achieve in terms of outcomes for society. So how are we going to balance the natural and environmental goals that we have, including net zero, with the social outcomes we want to achieve and with the economic outcomes we want to achieve? And how do we prioritize those for a particular asset that we're going to deliver? Now, if we're going to deliver outcomes in all these different areas of capital, then we have to collect data against each of these areas. And then we have to capture that data throughout the lifetime of the asset. In Green Book terms, that's 60 years. So we can't do that without technology, without platforms, and about effectively a digital twin model that captures data across all these outcome areas and allows us to understand what is the infrastructure doing, how does it perform against what we originally said it would do across all these outcomes, how can we improve it in real time, how can we get a better outcomes, how can we use it to drive down resource use. If we're going to get anywhere near our sustainable goals, we've got to drive down resource use rapidly, and that can't just be done through the technology process. It's got to be very aggressively achieved if we're going to get anywhere. So the ambition at this evolving scorecard, and I'm working with National Highways on this, with Heathrow, with a range of water companies, to help them make the decisions about their assets and then capture data around the systems level approach within appropriate platforms. This is one example of not a digital twin, but a digital platform. It's called the Intelligent Infrastructure Control Centre. It's been developed by Costain with DFT funding. It's an enterprise level tool that's available on SAP. And it helps, at the moment it's using for carbon capture, and it allows you to measure and track what's happening in terms of carbon, do comparisons, best practice, communicate externally with ESG investors, and give you a real-time reporting on what you're actually achieving from a carbon point of view. So that's not a digital twin. It's a platform for capturing some of these metrics, but it's a start in the right direction. So are we catching up? I don't have objective sort of data across a comparison with Germany or others. I know from a digital twin point of view, there are some really great examples of what is happening internationally, particularly with big cities. And I don't think we're catching up. But from a policy environment point of view, we're making a difference. We're making progress. I'm part of it as a result of my dissertation, so it's really exciting. So look forward to discussing with everybody else.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for your perceptions on this. I think it's very insightful. Certainly, I don't want to interrupt the flow of things. I do have a few things that I would like to communicate, but I'll leave that to the end. And basically, now I'd like to give the floor to Marios for your insights into whether you believe the UK is still a laggard with respect to smart manufacturing industry 4.0. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you all for your contributions. I have to say that I am in a privileged position in this discussion, in this debate today. Instead of, let's say, addressing a statement, I will leave it for the end to ask some questions, if that would help. Ask some questions to the three speakers to unpack some of the striking and very interesting points that they made earlier on. As for me, like if I could start with a short comment, our discussion today is whether the UK is a laggard in Industry 4.0. And my question, having discussed about this topic with my students and colleagues and businesses for the last couple of years, is whether this Industry 4.0 is truly an industrial revolution. And whether Industry 4.0 has rearranged relationships in society across industries at that level that can be comparable with the previous industrial revolutions, or if we are just discussing about the adoption and application of technologies within and across sectors. And we place everything under this umbrella term, Industry 4.0. In my view, this is an important issue to approach in a critical spirit because, as we know from research, this discourse and rhetoric surrounding Industry 4.0 emanates from the German context. Where German manufacturers started adopting technology and then using it to transform the ways in which they producing not only goods, but also being in a position to provide services to their clients and services to other manufacturers. So one of the questions I have, and I'm afraid I don't have an answer to share with you today, perhaps this could serve to open up this debate, is about whether the meaning of this Industry 4.0 discourse is the same across countries. Do we mean the same thing in the UK? Does it have the same meaning in the US? Well, I've started believing that, or I've started having doubts about it because each country having a different infrastructure may develop different approaches and different applications. And it's entitled to do so because the relationships within society and within industries differ. So with this broad statement, I would like to revisit some of the points made by the speakers today, as I would like to hear a little bit more about what they said. Yeah.
I would like to make just a very initial point. If we look at where does the Industry 4.0 start? It started with a standard, and the standard was based on ISO 95. And I did draw up this wonderful standard in terms of what it looked like from a functional point of view, and also how it maps across a smart factory. And really, it starts looking at things from the point of view of interconnectedness. It looks at you starting from the research center to the shop floor, and the shop floor where these cells are interconnected. Then it is connected into the enterprise system. And then the enterprise system is mapped to the company's database, and then it's interconnected to the supply chain, and it's really looks at all of the interfaces from end to end, from all of those different component parts. Now, that is how it was initially perceived to be the precursor to what we now understand to be Industry 4.0. It is my belief that this message has changed and has been diluted depending on the national interpretation of it and the requirements, and of course of the industry. And I'll leave it there. That's my 2 cents worth.
Excellent point.
May I add something from the American perspective?
Sure.
Industry 4.0, until the Biden administration came along, was not a very, let's say, leading concept in the United States. It was viewed as an invention of the European Union and especially of Germany. And Germany, of course, has, in pushing for that, Germany has its own strategic agenda. And that is to use some of its advantages to push a certain version of Industry 4.0, which emphasizes making money on, let's say, the green industry and the greening of industry. And I think that has to be understood, as it were. Now, since the Democrats took over, there is, let's say, a much greater degree of friendliness, not so much explicitly to Industry 4.0, but to the ideas that lie behind it, of which the best example is the famous IRS system of subsidies, which actually make it very attractive for even European companies, not only American companies, to make certain kinds of investments in the United States. And already you're seeing a big response, because you're talking over $350 billion of assorted subsidies that have to do, among other things, with sustainability and the green economy. So, you know, it's up to the UK to decide where they want to be. Now that you're free from the European Union, maybe this is a case where global Britain could branch out on its own.
Yes, it's very important also to extend discussions about digitalization and the impact of technologies on the world of work, on society, on culture, instead of just addressing this narrow context. Still important, that is like described with this umbrella term, Industry 4.0. And this gives me an opportunity to get back to what Rosa mentioned earlier on. And it's great news to see that the UK is scoring like at the top in terms of the Digital Future Index, which means that the UK businesses and society is doing great in terms of adopting technology. Does this mean that the UK in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, will be a leader in manufacturer? One question, and another, the second one is, why is the US and China doing better?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, because I have to say, when I looked at the Digital Future Index, frankly, I was shocked. There are absolutely companies within the UK that will be the leading lights, both here within the UK and around the world, and they will absolutely transform as a result of that. But what I pick up on is a cultural hesitation flowing from some of those elements that I touched on earlier. And I think that part of the UK business culture doesn't help us with that. It's really interesting that, Joe, you started us off within this conversation by looking at Germany. And I think if you look at what happens in Germany in terms of the way that businesses interact with each other when they are not in contract mode, you know, what's happening at the local level in terms of businesses having discussions and reaching out for support and all of that sort of thing is often quite different to what happens here within the UK. And I think some of those sorts of features actually have meant that it is easier to move the whole of a business population in one direction rather faster than we see here within the UK, where too often what I see happening is businesses sort of getting with the program one by one individually. There's not a grand charge. Now, sometimes that's not helped by the structure and frankly complexity and pain associated with the sort of support that's available through government subsidies and other mechanisms. You know, we've got to think about that. But I do think that there are cultural aspects to this that actually go beyond just the plain old-fashioned, it's all about money, as I was saying earlier.
Yes, and this is a very important point that was also addressed in the following statement. So I think like this is a question that we can all reflect upon. Tomasz mentioned that the private sector is spending 10 times more in artificial intelligence research than the public sector. Now, first question is that, is it a problem? And second question is, what should governments do to reverse the situation and avoid negative consequences of this massive investment coming from the private sector? What should governments do?
Well, a great question. Before I address that, very interesting question, and of course there's a big debate about that, and it is related, among other things, to AI. But I want to point out that there is the two things we need to keep in mind. One is the time factor and the ability of societies to adjust to these, because I do believe that AI and Industry 4.0, they are very disruptive revolutions. And they are going to change the way things are done. But because they are so disruptive, it takes a lot of social energy to adjust. I mean, just the first thing that comes to mind is the impact of AI technology, not only on employment itself, but on the way we do things. And we've seen already in the United States how ChatGPT is changing the way we need to teach. And the students have really caught up with this. I'm sure it's similar in London. I don't know, tell me. But we have to think very quickly on our feet. So there is this factor. And the other factor is, of course, was mentioned in incentive programs. You know, in principle, the United States says it's all for free markets. And in principle, we shouldn't be creating massive incentives. The reality is that the leading countries are creating massive incentive programs that actually do affect business decisions. And we are in the United States, we are, of course, facing the challenge of not only modernizing industry, but we're trying to bring back industry into the United States from China. That is one of the biggest challenges. And the initial reaction of many businesses was very great deal of reluctance. Why should we give up on this terrific deal we have with the Chinese? And how fast should we do that? But now there is early evidence to suggest that, yes, money talks. And the various incentives that the Biden administration has put in place is beginning to motivate companies to what we call reshore back some of the industries back into the United States. But back to your question, Marios, what the governments, should they be doing or not? I mean, that's a sort of, you know, million-dollar question. For example, there's a very vigorous debate here about whether or not the government should move to A, regulate, B, perhaps demonopolize this AI revolution. There are some observers who think that we're moving towards some very powerful digital monopolies, or even, I think Varoufakis calls it techno-feudalism. Have you heard that term? So, I mean, that is definitely something that has not been decided, but I think that I don't think governments can avoid having to adopt some response to that.
Yes, Rosa.
A few thoughts from me. I spent sort of 30 years or more of my career working in central government. Let's not be naive about this. Tax is a valuable thing, but nobody really likes paying it, and no government can afford to do everything. So am I comfortable with a 10-to-1 ratio between what business is spending and what government is spending? Actually, yeah, I am. I think that the duty of government is to look at where investment is needed, and as far as it can, to create the conditions for that investment to flow. Now, there are certain elements of that where government will say, okay, we've done all that we can here, but we perhaps need to do a bit more because of other things that are going on elsewhere in the world, which create a difficult playing field for us. Actually, Tomasz, you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act era and other things that are happening in the States. That means that the environment within which government is trying to encourage investment has actually changed, because there is something going on beyond these shores that will suck potential investment away from us. At the same time, there are sometimes certain things that government needs to do to make sure that elements of the investment are spent in the right way. And there I think about some of the debates that I pick up around security in digital tools. And then, of course, it's not just about what government spends in terms of either fiscal rules, taxation, and grants that it might give to companies. It's also the role that government can play as a really, really significant launch investor stroke early adopter. You know, one of the roles that I had in a past life was as Director of Innovation at the UK's Intellectual Property Office. Brilliant job. But one of the messages that I was picking up from an awful lot of companies, particularly in the health sector, was that very often they were developing products that would absolutely go great guns on a global market if, and by the way, had all of the right regulatory approvals, if government actually started by buying. And if our government started by buying, then that would give the purchaser confidence around the world. Sometimes our government can actually push money in by doing that, and it doesn't then always show up in terms of the analysis of who is spending what on digital technologies. So do I think that governments are spending about the right level? I haven't got a Scooby. I really don't know. Do I think it's right that there's a distinction between the amount the private sector spends and government spends? Hell yes.
May I add one other important dimension to the role of governments, and that is what was mentioned as the security dimension. So we have, in addition to all the other complications, we have the whole question of, let's say, American sanctions or Western sanctions, not only on Russia, but to some degree on China, in restricting the supply of certain chip-making technologies, to name but one. So this is yet another very sensitive sort of dimension of what we're talking about.
Certainly. And well, I would say that possibly priorities have changed for governments and the public, shifting focus a bit away from issues of profitability into addressing environmental and social issues, themes which were reflected on Jeremy's framework, which I found personally inspiring. And the framework which has potential to be adopted, as you said, not only in infrastructure projects, but also by startups and businesses that are actively seeking for funding. As we discussed a lot about funding issues, barriers, challenges. Do you think, Jeremy, that if startups, SMEs, or manufacturers in the UK adopt this framework to demonstrate their accountability and how they achieve these objectives, will help them convince funders that what they do is good for society as well, so that it will enable them to attract further funding?
Yes, I think is the quick answer. It wouldn't be looking quite the same as that model, but the principle of a diagram that speaks to your stakeholders, that says this is not about one issue. It's not about us making money. It's not about giving employment. It's not about the supply chain. It's about all these things. And this is how we're trying to hold these in tension. I think it is really effective, and it speaks to the ESG debate and all the different guidance there is around investors. So all these things need to be articulated, but I like the way that picture talks of the approach to a systems level approach to value, and that's the bottom line. It's about value to society, not just value in terms of pounds.
Thank you. Well, I have so many questions to ask, but I'm aware of the time, so I think I will leave it here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, given we've only got 2 minutes left, I'm really very happy that we've all managed to come together and to discuss this topic, which, you know, it's still a burgeoning topic. It's not finished yet, and it's got so much more road to go. So thank you very much, everybody, for your contributions. I welcome the opportunity to have another discussion, maybe on a different slanted area, but still related to this in the near future. Thank you, Helen.
Excellent
Thanks,
idea.
Thanks, everyone. It was brilliant.
Thanks, Jeremy, Rosa.
Thank you all.
Thank you so
Jeremy,
much.
can I ask you for a favor? Could you send me your slides?
Sorry,
Jeremy?
Jeremy, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, no problem, Tomasz.
I would appreciate